This is the third part of my series criticizing the IWW. And today I'm going to talk about ecology. So, anarchists often fantasize about the power of a decentralized organization. See, in a centralized organization, you can cut off the heads, imprison the leaders, and then all of a sudden, the organization falls apart. But in a decentralized organization, this isn't a problem, and there's no need to really coordinate anything. There's not even a need for democracy, because if people disagree with the democratic decisions, they can simply go against them, right? So the IWW is based on this sort of decentralized idea, right? Simply support all struggles against the existing order of things and let conflicts play themselves out without mediation. This is what I detailed in my last video, where I touched on the IWW's support on arbitrary labor struggles, national struggles, and other political struggles with no real coherent logic in favor of people's real needs and no ability to place these struggles in context, rather than supporting them as individual actions without understanding the broader situation. Now, this is focused on labor, but today I'm going to focus on the IWW's Environmental Caucus, which, as far as I can tell, is just pretty much an online forum. Maybe it does correspond to a real, sort of environmental caucus, but the IWW has this thing. And as far as I can tell, it's just an online forum, but it's relatively active, and it's a place where people discuss radical, anarchist green policy, and specifically the supposed intersection between labor and ecology. Now, despite their rejection of anarcho-primitivism, these people have the anarcho-primitivist flag right here in the background of their website, right? But let's just ignore that for now. And let's ask, how can this be? Does this actually make sense? Now, the justification that tends to be given for the alignment between ecology and labor is based first and foremost on the so-called objectivity of bourgeois science. So there's this idea that climate science, despite being a bourgeois science, despite being a science which exists in capitalist society, which is funded by private corporations, which is often funded by the US military and their interests, despite all of this, this science is assumed to be correct, and it's assumed to be objective, and therefore it's claimed that it's apolitical. Now, we can see that it is, in fact, political, but the IWW will claim that it isn't, and they will refuse to sort of put it into question. The second thing is they believe that because of settler colonialism, native peoples who want to reclaim their land and maybe set things back to how they were before, they kind of believe that somehow, there's an objectivity about supporting the real movement of native peoples who they claim to support these struggles. They say, they kind of have a stereotype about like the crying Indian, like that commercial from the 70s. And they claim, that native people simply want to return to how things were. Not that they want to live on the same level as everyone else in America, but rather that they want to go back to hunting caribou and this kind of thing. And the third thing is this sort of idea of automation versus labor. And it's this true notion that automation does undermine labor, but they get it twisted, they get it confused in thinking that labor unions and workers will inherently oppose automation because it takes away their jobs. Now, in the short term, in the economist perspective, it may be true that automation takes away jobs, but in the long run, automation can also improve the quality of people's lives and allow them to work less and have more free time, at least in theory. So we have to understand this contradiction that while automation undermines the immediate interests of workers, At the same time, it makes it possible for a better society to emerge in the future, and it represents a furthering of the contradiction between the conditions of labor and the needs of people, the conditions of technology and the organization of labor, right? So this eco-activism has been part of the IWW for at least a few decades. And you could say it started out with the woman Judy Bari, who is actually famous for getting bombed. There's multiple documentaries about her getting bombed. And she organized eco strikes with the NGO called Earth First in 1988. Judy Bari organized strikes against the cutting of old growth redwoods in California. And her IWW number, X332349, you can find everywhere on this forum, for example, right here. Now, despite the fact that Judy Bari died in, she died long before 2020, there's still, they still say that everything is submitted by her, which is, I guess that's like a nod to her, right? So she's kind of like this very important figure that represents the start of this thing and represents this sort of spiritual or abstract idea that we have to, carry out her legacy in order, that's what we're doing here with the IWW unionism. We're green unionism. We're carrying out her legacy, right? This thing that she established. Now, obviously, there's questions about, who's behind this, IWW ecology thing, right? Was Judy Bari acting on her own? I think she was. But, who's behind this? Well, they're affiliated with this group called Earth Strike UK, which is a British organization, and it's based on the same sort of stupid notion that the IWW has, that we can simply declare a general strike around a political issue. Now, of course, they'll say that it's apolitical to declare a strike, but of course it is a political issue, right? And in this case, it's not even opposing wars, which I think you can unite the broad base of people on opposing wars. But this would be a strike around green policy, which something that people won't even agree on. Like, the broad masses of people will not agree to hold a general strike on green policy. I doubt that you could get an entire workplace to organize a sort of earth strike. The only cases where I think labor will actually align with ecology is kind of like in the situation with Judy Bari, where, the redwood old growth forests are a national treasure. There's something worth protecting. And that's something that people are going to, want to protect. And the other time they're going to align is when people are being Luddites and they're fighting against automation, the inevitable tide of automation, which labor is fighting against. Now, this is another organization that they're affiliated with. This is Extinction Rebellion. I'm sure you've heard of this one. This is another British organization, and this one is in fact allowed to post directly onto their website. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Extinction Rebellion, especially if you're watching this, but just know that they get a lot of money from very wealthy donors. Their message has been deemed suitable and amplified by almost every single major platform, and they probably operate in your town, at least if you're in America. And the message of Extinction Rebellion, while compatible with this sort of Earth Strike idea, it's actually a mass death ideology. You see, they want to have zero net emissions by 2025, which would mean completely destroying our energy capacity. It's not something that's possible without causing mass death. And they pretty much, their message, because they demand the impossible, because they demand mass death, their message is essentially not a specific policy, but rather the idea that it's too late, the eco-apocalypse is coming, and they cart around demon child Greta Thunberg to scare people into thinking that the world is going to end soon. And I think that Extinction Rebellion could not be any more controversial than they are. They are a group that exists to stir controversy. And you want to tell me that somehow this is apolitical. Somehow this is all just based in hard science, or this like represents the actual desires of the working class. I don't really think that that is true. I really don't think that that is true. Now, there's a line being walked here. See, the IWW doesn't talk explicitly about sabotage. Maybe they just don't allow themselves to because they don't want to get in trouble. But this black cat that you see with all of their imagery, its name is Sabo, meaning sabotage. So, people in the IWW, they do believe in sabotage, and they do salivate over sabotage as part of their like eco thing, especially the younger people, right? And they have nothing but praise for these sort of burn it down protesters. Now, they do believe in the protest cage, but a lot of members of the IWW, because they don't have an explicit, conditioning, like, you have to have some sense of maturity, do the right thing at the right time. No, they just praise people that want to burn things down, and they see it all in line with their ideas. But they are not totally psychotic and deranged, actually. They do have some rational limitations. So, the Green Caucus, of course, is based around these environmental issues and spreading this sort of message about degrowth. But they're also highly critical of anarcho-primitivism, which they correctly identify as a mass death ideology, except they call it ableist, fringe, and other things in their own way. They refuse to call it out so overtly. Now, there is in fact, even a debate on this website with the issue of degrowth. They're mostly in favor of degrowth, but there are people that oppose it, or at least people that recognize sort of the limitations and consequences of this idea, and they warn against Malthusianism and exterminationism. They warn against eco-extremism and eco-fascism, which is really funny because they partner with and advocate for these mass death ideas about the climate. It's like they don't understand the contradiction within their own ideas. And how can they call these things objective when the entire basis of this sort of eco struggle is coming from bourgeois science? I mean, yes, environmental destruction is real. Yes, I would say, we should protect, for example, the redwood forests as a national treasure, especially if that's what the people of America, if that's what the workers can agree on and unite on. We should protect our national treasures, and we shouldn't simply bulldoze everything. We shouldn't allow for mass pollution. We shouldn't allow, we have to take the environmental issues very, very seriously, but at the same time we have to put into question, by taking it seriously, you have to question yourself and make sure that you're speaking the truth. And when you echo bourgeois science, how can you know that you're speaking the truth? How can you actually know that? And where does this pretense of objectivity come from? In fact, I think that this is a case where these sort of debates that go on this website actually seem to strengthen the false sense of rationality or practicality that the IWW has in general. When I first joined the IWW, people told me, I'm glad you came here. For many of us, it took decades to get to this point. Pretty much saying that the IWW to them felt like this sort of oasis of reason and objectivity and, engaging in a real meaningful struggle. And so the IWW seems and feels very rational in its rejection of the partisan divide, but it still reproduces this divide with its implicit support for Democrat issues. It reproduces this divide by framing conservatives as fascist, and it is chock full of boomers whose politics are based on this sort of childish, George Carlin-esque, roasting of conservative thought. And it's chock full of also of Zoomers who, echoing these boomers, though, claiming to reject them, whose politics are based on the perception that, black masks and Molotov cocktails are the solution to the so-called fascist menace. They love to talk about punching Nazis, and they act as though they've correctly identified baby Hitler and chosen to drown him. They act as though they've correctly identified this budding fascist movement among conservatives, and that we need to drown that movement. And so, of course, these conservatives, in their head, they're thinking this: of course, we have to make sacrifices now for the climate and for ecology and all of this, but if we don't do it, then everybody will die somewhere down the line, right? So these conservatives are the real fascists because they're willing to let everybody die, right? Now, the IWW's so-called apolitical supportive labor, which, we know it's a political thing, this actually, to me, aligns with the pro-labor stances of Democrats. I believe in pro-labor as long as it's trending towards something greater, towards something revolutionary. And I caution against economism, which is where you are asking for immediate demands and you're not trying to, achieve something more broad and more important, but rather the immediate demands of workers, right? I caution against that. But the IWW simply supports labor in general, right? And they support Democrats because their support of labor is not in this broader thing where they're trying to achieve something greater, but it rather is this sort of economist view of labor, right? And at the same time, the IWW pretends that the positions pretty much of Democrats, right? Now, of course, they occupy the rad lib position where Democrats don't go far enough. And so, of course, we need to take things into our own hands. But it's still sort of rooted in the assumption that these things that Democrats are appealing to are the real demands of labor, the real demands of the masses. And this reflects this sort of urban isolation that the IWW has, where since they operate in areas that are mostly Democrat, and since they're apolitical, being a Democrat or supporting the Democratic Party or thinking that the Democrats are right and they simply don't go far enough, all of this is just par for the course based on how they actually organize. But this flies in the face of existing labor unions, some of which are actually quite conservative, right? And though these unions may fight against automation, just like the IWW says you should, they are far from in favor of this sort of radical eco-activism, which more than likely means that the workers in this union would lose their jobs and livelihood. The position of these unions is as resistors, as limiters. They centralize labor and enable strikes to occur, but they also limit labor and serve as bodies of compromise to try to slow things down, which is completely antithetical to any kind of green panic. And though they fund major parties, there's a difference between what the leaders of these unions and their membership believe. Many of these members, they don't believe in the message of the Democratic Party just because they're in a Democrat union. A lot of them are in the union because they want to live a good life, and they're actually quite conservative or even reactionary because their life is good and comfortable, because they're paid enough, and because, they don't want that to be upset. Now, the IWW, should concern itself with what people actually want and with what they actually believe. But in their pro-labor stance, they neglect a major part of labor. How can they reconcile this contradiction where a huge part of the working class, where a huge part of labor is conservative or even reactionary, and the IWW claims to support what workers want in general, while completely ignoring this massive constituency? Now, this IWW is kind of stuck, in this root of Zoomer politics, this sort of, which reflects the sort of boomer politics, this sort of belief, that they are the authentic populists, that right-wing populism represents fascism, that conservatism, represents fascism, yet they claim to be apolitical. And this is what really bothers me the most. They claim to be completely practical and objective and apolitical while completely engaging in this very explicit political struggle. The only claim that they have to actually being apolitical is that they don't participate in any kind of representative democracy or any kind of electoral struggles. But overall, the IWW is absolutely a political organization. Now, this is a critique of the IWW's green politics. I already made 2 other videos criticizing other aspects of the IWW, and I'm likely to make even more videos, and I will eventually get into my very juicy personal experiences trying to organize with the IWW. So, maybe next time I will finally get around to that. You'll just have to see. Stay tuned, and this has been Hertz from Bismuth. Remember to like the video if you like it, dislike if you don't like it. Comment if you have something to add, maybe I missed something. Subscribe for more, and share this video around so that other people can get the message. See you next time.